My MIL told her book club about my case. The husband tried to kill his wife. My mother-in-law is a small-town southern gossip who lives for drama. I'm a divorce attorney, which to her is Christmas every day. Always pumping me for work stories to share at church. I give vague crumbs, nothing specific, always ethical. She flew in for my husband's birthday. I was working from home on a particularly messy divorce. Took a shower break before lunch. Left files in my locked office like always. At lunch, after our iced teas arrived, she says, "So what happened with the Johnsons kids? Did she get custody, or were they destroyed?" I snorted tea everywhere. She knew names, details, specifics only possible from reading confidential client files. "How do you know about my case?" "Oh, I was cleaning your office while you showered." My office wasn't dirty. This file is massive. To know what she knew, she had to sit and read through multiple pages of confidential documents. She didn't glimpse, she actively snooped. "You read my client files?" "Your office needed cleaning." I threw cash on the table, dragged her to the car, screaming the whole ride, "You could destroy my career. This is illegal. I could be disbarred. Clients could sue me." She kept saying I was overreacting, wouldn't tell anyone. Like that matters. She violated attorney-client privilege in my home. Got home, "Pack your things or I'll have you arrested for trespassing." "You can't be serious." Pack. N-O-W. Called an Uber. Set destination to airport. Watched her get in. No plane ticket. No money. Just sent her to figure it out. My husband works on a secure site. No phones until 5 p.m. No idea his mother's sitting at the airport trying to get home. Probably been there 3 hours. Part of me feels guilty. She's elderly, unfamiliar city, confused. But she went through confidential legal documents. Could have cost me my license, career, everything. If clients found out their divorce details were read by some random gossip-hungry woman, phone buzzing nonstop. 17 missed calls from unknown number, probably airport payphone. 2 from sister-in-law asking if everything's okay because MIL called crying. Nothing from husband yet. 4:47 p.m. 13 minutes until he discovers I shipped his mother to the airport like unwanted cargo. 5:23 p.m. Husband called. "Where's my mother?" "Airport." "Why?" She read my confidential client files, the entire divorce case, while I showered. Silence. "She what?" "Went through my locked office, read privileged documents for gossip material." "Jesus, is your job okay?" "Don't know. Depends if she keeps quiet." "I'll call her. Book her a one-way flight." "You're not mad? At her? She could have destroyed our livelihood for gossip. Lucky you didn't call police." 7:45 p.m. Mill on plane home. Husband paid after 40-minute lecture about boundaries, legal consequences. She's banned indefinitely. She tried tears. Just curious. Small-town woman doesn't understand big city law. Husband's response, "You read someone's diary." Financial records, custody arrangements, affairs, abuse allegations, violated real people during their worst time. She's texted 12 apologies. Haven't responded. Meeting with managing partner tomorrow about informing the client. Career might still be over. Worst part? She texted husband separately. Don't understand why she's upset. Not like I was telling everyone, just my book club. Book club. 20 gossip-hungry women in a small town where everyone knows everyone. Changing locks tomorrow. Never leaving office unlocked again. But this morning, everything changed. Managing partner called before our meeting. "We have a problem." "About my mother-in-law?" "No, about the Johnson case she read." My stomach dropped. "What about it?" "Mrs. Johnson called. Says someone contacted her husband's lawyer with information only in your files." "What?" "Details about hidden assets she disclosed to you. The offshore accounts, the mistress's pregnancy, things only in your confidential notes." "That's impossible." "The opposing counsel has it all. They're filing for full custody based on her mental health disclosures, using her therapy records against her. My mother-in-law doesn't even know opposing counsel. Your mother-in-law posted in a Facebook group last night. Prayer Warriors of Tennessee. Asked for prayers for a poor woman whose cheating husband is hiding money in the Caymans while his pregnant mistress gets everything. I pulled up Facebook. There it was. 147 comments. 89 shares. It gets worse, my partner continued. Mr. Johnson's lawyer? His paralegal is from your mother-in-law's hometown. No. They screenshot everything before it was deleted. They're filing a bar complaint. Malpractice suit. Mrs. Johnson's probably losing her kids because of this breach. My phone buzzed. Text from unknown number. The text is from Mrs. Johnson, and my hands shake as I read it. My lawyer just called. They're using my therapy records against me. How did they get those? You promised me confidentiality. I stare at my phone, unable to form a response that doesn't sound like the hollow excuse it is. My husband sits next to me on the couch, reading over my shoulder. His face goes pale when he sees the message. Neither of us says anything for what feels like hours, but is probably just minutes. The silence feels heavy, like the air before a storm. My phone keeps buzzing with more texts from Mrs. Johnson, each one more desperate than the last. I can't bring myself to open them. My husband finally breaks the quiet. His voice comes out rough and broken. I'm so sorry. I look at him and realize he's crying. Not just tearing up, but actually crying. Tears running down his face. He's mourning both my career and the mother he thought he knew. His whole body shakes with it. I reach for his hand and we just sit there together. Both of us crying now. Both of us understanding that everything we've built is falling apart because his mother couldn't mind her own business. The night stretches on forever. Neither of us sleeps much. Every time I close my eyes, I see Mrs. Johnson's text, her words burned into my brain. The next morning comes too fast and too slow at the same time. I have a meeting scheduled with Wilhelmina Harvey, the attorney Mrs. Johnson hired to handle this disaster. My managing partner set it up yesterday before everything got even worse. I drive to her office downtown, my stomach churning the entire way. The building is one of those old converted warehouses, all exposed brick and industrial windows. Her office is on the 3rd floor. The receptionist leads me back immediately, no waiting, which somehow makes it worse. Wilhelmina stands when I enter and she doesn't offer to shake my hand. She's tall, maybe 6 feet, with gray hair pulled back tight and glasses that make her eyes look huge. She gestures to a chair across from her desk and I sit. She doesn't waste time on pleasantries or small talk. Her voice is direct and cold. Opposing counsel is pushing for emergency custody modification. They filed the motion yesterday afternoon. I nod, unable to speak. She continues without waiting for a response. They're using the mental health revelations from your files. Your mother-in-law's Facebook post gave them enough specific details to know exactly what to request in discovery. My throat feels tight. What are Mrs. Johnson's chances? Wilhelmina's expression doesn't change. Not good. The information about her postpartum depression and current anxiety treatment is exactly what they needed. She pulls out a folder and opens it, showing me documents I recognize from my own files. Seeing them here, in another attorney's office, being used against my client, makes me feel sick. Wilhelmina explains that Mrs. Johnson had disclosed her past struggles with postpartum depression after her first child was born. She'd been honest about currently seeing a therapist for anxiety related to the divorce. All of it was shared in confidence, never expecting it would be turned into a weapon. Now, Mr. Johnson's lawyer is painting her as mentally unstable. They're arguing she's unfit for primary custody. They're using her honesty against her, twisting her responsible choice to seek help into evidence of incompetence. Wilhelmina shows me the motion they filed. The language is brutal. Words like documented mental instability, and ongoing psychological treatment, and history of depression. All technically true, but stripped of context, made to sound dangerous. Mrs. Johnson trusted me with her most private struggles, and now they're being broadcast in a courtroom, used to take her children away. The irony isn't lost on me that my mother-in-law's gossip has caused exactly the kind of harm I've spent my career trying to prevent. I lean forward, desperate to help somehow. I'll testify. I'll explain exactly how the breach occurred. I'll take full responsibility. Wilhelmina shakes her head before I finish speaking. Her voice stays flat and professional. That won't help. I start to argue, but she cuts me off. Your testimony will make things worse. You'll be highlighting how carelessly the information was handled in the first place. The words hit like a physical blow. She's right. Me getting on the stand and explaining that I left confidential files in an unlocked room, that I trusted my mother-in-law not to snoop, that I failed to protect my client's most sensitive information, that won't help Mrs. Johnson. It'll just underscore how badly I failed at my most basic duty. Wilhelmina closes the folder. The best thing you can do for Mrs. Johnson now is stay away from this case entirely. Let me handle the damage control. I nod, knowing she's right but hating it anyway. Walking out of her office feels like walking away from a car accident I caused, leaving someone else to deal with the wreckage. That afternoon, my phone rings. Unknown number. I almost don't answer, still shaken from the meeting with Wilhelmina, but something makes me pick up. It's Mrs. Johnson. Her voice sounds completely different from the last time we spoke. All the energy is gone. She sounds exhausted, beaten down, like someone who hasn't slept in days. Why? Just that one word, but it carries so much weight. I brace for anger, for yelling, for the rage I know I deserve. Instead, there's just this tired, broken question. Why did this happen? Why did I let it happen? Why did I fail her? I try to explain about my mother-in-law, about the locked office, about not knowing she would violate that boundary. The words sound pathetic even as I say them. I trusted the wrong person in my own home. It's the only honest answer I have. Mrs. Johnson is quiet for a long moment. When she speaks again, her voice cracks. I trusted you. Those 3 words destroy me more completely than any angry tirade could. She trusted me with her secrets, her fears, her vulnerabilities. She told me things she hadn't told anyone else. And I let those things get stolen and used against her. The silence stretches between us, heavy with everything we can't say. Mrs. Johnson starts talking again, her words tumbling out in a rush. Her kids are confused and scared about the sudden custody hearing. They don't understand why they might have to move, why everything is changing so fast. Her ex-husband is using this chaos to paint her as the villain. He's telling them that mommy caused all this trouble, that mommy's problems are why their lives are being turned upside down. He's twisting the narrative, making himself the stable parent, and her the unstable one. The pain in her voice when she talks about her children makes me feel physically sick. My stomach churns, and for a moment I think I might actually throw up. These are real kids, real lives being damaged because my mother-in-law couldn't resist reading other people's private business. Mrs. Johnson describes her daughter asking why Daddy's lawyer knows about Mommy's doctor visits. She describes her son crying because he doesn't want to live at Daddy's house with the new girlfriend. I close my eyes, but I can still hear every word, each one cutting deeper. When she finally hangs up, I sit in my car in the parking lot and cry until I can't anymore. I need to understand exactly how this happened. Need to document the chain of events for the Barr investigation that's definitely coming. I call Rosa McKee, a private investigator I've worked with on several cases over the years. She's good at tracing information, following digital trails, connecting dots that seem unconnected. I explain the situation, leaving nothing out. Rosa listens without interrupting, and when I finish, she says she'll start immediately. Her voice is businesslike, professional, but I can hear the concern underneath. She knows what this means for my career. She knows how bad this is. I give her access to the Facebook screenshots, my mother-in-law's profile, everything I have. Rosa promises to call as soon as she finds anything. I don't expect to hear back for days, maybe a week. This kind of investigation takes time, requires careful work, involves tracking down connections that aren't obvious. Rosa calls back 3 hours later. I'm sitting at home staring at my computer screen without really seeing it, when my phone rings. She's found the paralegal who screenshot my mother-in-law's post. Her name is Pearl Corona. She's been working for Floyd Mathis, Mr. Aunt Johnson's attorney, for 6 years. Rosa's voice is matter-of-fact as she recites the information, but I can tell she knows how damaging this is. Pearl Corona from my mother-in-law's hometown, working for opposing counsel, perfectly positioned to connect the dots. Rosa keeps talking, giving me more details. Pearl graduated from a community college with a paralegal certificate, started working for Floyd right after. She's been with his firm ever since, handling all his divorce cases, managing his files, screening his calls. She's trusted, experienced, exactly the kind of employee who would recognize important information when she saw it. And she saw my mother-in-law's Facebook post in their shared prayer group. Rosa digs deeper and finds the connections I was dreading. Pearl and my mother-in-law attend the same church. Not just any church, but a small congregation where everyone knows everyone. They're in the same book club. They're in the same prayer group on Facebook. The group is called Prayer Warriors of Tennessee, and it has about 50 members, all women from their hometown and surrounding area. My mother-in-law posted asking for prayers for a poor woman whose cheating husband is hiding money in the Caymans while his pregnant mistress gets everything. Rosa reads the exact wording to me, and I feel my chest tighten. Those specific details, the offshore accounts, the Cayman Islands, the pregnant mistress, they're all from my files. All from information Mrs. Johnson shared with me in confidence. Pearl saw that post and recognized enough details to know it matched her boss's case. Small towns, everyone knowing everyone's business, and my mother-in-law's need to gossip just destroyed my client's life. The next morning, I meet Rosa in person at a coffee shop downtown. She brings her laptop and a folder full of printed documents. We sit in a corner booth away from other customers. Rosa opens her laptop and shows me the full digital trail she's constructed. Screenshots of the Facebook post timestamped to show exactly when it went live. Screenshots showing when Pearl saw it, when she captured it, when she forwarded it. Rosa has built a complete timeline. The post appeared at 8:32 p.m. Pearl screenshot it at 8:51 p.m., just 19 minutes later. She must have been scrolling through her phone before bed, saw the post, and immediately recognized the details. Rosa shows me the email Pearl sent to Floyd Mathis at 9:03 p.m. that same night. The subject line reads, Johnson case information. The body of the email is brief. Pearl attached the screenshot and wrote one sentence. This might be about the Johnson case. Professional, careful, covering herself legally while still getting the information to her boss. Floyd responded at 6:15 the next morning, asking Pearl to pull all their files on the Johnson case and prepare a comparison. By noon that day, they'd filed their motion for emergency custody modification. Rosa shows me Floyd's motion to compel discovery next. He filed it 2 days after Pearl sent him the screenshot. The motion cites credible information from a reliable source suggesting Mrs. Johnson has undisclosed mental health issues that could affect her ability to parent. He doesn't name my mother-in-law or mention Facebook, just says he received information from someone with knowledge of the situation. The judge granted the motion based on how specific Floyd's claims were. He knew about the postpartum depression from 8 years ago. He knew about the anxiety medication Mrs. Johnson started taking 6 months ago. He knew about the therapy sessions she'd been attending twice a week. All of that came from my files, from notes I took during confidential conversations with my client. Rosa pulls up my mother-in-law's Facebook post again, and we compare it line by line to my case notes. Every single detail matches. The Cayman Islands account at First Caribbean International Bank. The mistress's due date in November. The specific amount Mr. Johnson transferred before filing for divorce. Even the name of Mrs. Johnson's therapist appeared in a comment my mother-in-law made responding to someone in the prayer group. There's no way to argue this leak came from anywhere else. My mother-in-law read my files, memorized enough details to sound authoritative, and shared it all with her prayer group thinking she was helping. Rosa closes her laptop and looks at me with something like pity. She says the evidence is clear and damning, and any investigation will trace the breach directly back to my home office and my failure to secure it properly. I drive home feeling sick. My husband gets back from work an hour later and finds me sitting in the dark in our living room. He turns on a lamp and sits next to me without saying anything at first. Then he asks what happened today, and I tell him about Rosa's findings, about Pearl Corona and the timeline, about how the Facebook post matches my notes exactly. He puts his head in his hands. After a long silence, he asks if my career is over. I tell him I don't know yet, but it's looking bad. He asks if there's anything he can do, and I shake my head. The damage is done. His mother violated my trust and my client's privacy, and now Mrs. Johnson is going to lose her kids because of it. We sit there together for a while, not talking, just existing in the same space while everything falls apart around us. My phone rings. It's Mark calling from the office. He tells me Judah has been assigned to investigate my case for the Bar Association. I ask who Judah is, and Mark explains he's his brother, works as an investigator for professional conduct complaints. Mark sounds sorry about it, but says Judah is fair and thorough, which doesn't make me feel better at all. Fair and thorough means he'll find everything Rosa found and probably more. Mark says Judah will want to interview me soon, probably within the week. I thank him for the heads up and hang up. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrives by certified mail. Inside is formal notice that Donovan Steele, a Bar Association prosecutor, is handling the ethics complaint against me. The charges are laid out in careful legal language. Failure to maintain client confidentiality, negligent security of privileged information, violation of professional conduct rules. Each charge cites specific rule numbers and includes a description of the alleged violation. Reading it makes everything feel more real and more terrible. This isn't just my managing partner being concerned or my client being upset. This is the state bar formally accusing me of professional misconduct that could end my license to practice law. The letter says I have 30 days to respond in writing, and that an investigation is underway. It lists Judah as the assigned investigator and provides his contact information. I'm supposed to cooperate fully with his investigation or face additional charges for obstruction. I put the letter down and stare at it for a long time. My husband finds me like that when he comes home, still staring at the letter on the kitchen table. He reads it over my shoulder and I hear him take a sharp breath. Then his phone rings. It's his sister. I can hear her voice from across the room, high and defensive. My husband walks into the other room to take the call, but I follow him because I need to know what she's saying. She's trying to defend their mother, saying she's just an old woman who doesn't understand technology. My husband cuts her off and tells her this has nothing to do with understanding Facebook. His mother read confidential work files that didn't belong to her. She violated attorney-client privilege. She destroyed someone's custody case. His sister keeps trying to make excuses and my husband keeps shutting them down. Finally, I take the phone from him. I tell her that her mother didn't accidentally see something on a computer screen. She sat in my office and read through pages of confidential documents. She memorized details about offshore accounts, therapy sessions, affairs, custody arrangements. Then she posted it all on Facebook asking for prayers. Reading someone's confidential work files has nothing to do with understanding technology. It's about basic respect and boundaries, and her mother violated both. My sister-in-law goes quiet. Then she says her mother is crying and feels terrible. I tell her that feeling terrible doesn't undo the damage. Mrs. Johnson is losing her children because of what her mother did. That's not something an apology can fix. I hang up before she can respond. An hour later, my phone rings again. This time it's Elias, my sister-in-law's husband. He sounds calm and reasonable, like he's trying to be the peacemaker. He says he understands we're upset, but maybe we could all sit down and talk this through. He offers to mediate between us and my mother-in-law, help us find some common ground. I tell him there's nothing to mediate. His mother-in-law needs to acknowledge the full scope of what she's done and stop making excuses. Until she does that, there's nothing to talk about. Elias tries to argue that she does understand, she's just having trouble expressing it. I tell him that if she understood, she wouldn't have texted my husband saying she didn't know why I was so upset since she was only telling her book club. Understanding means accepting that she violated confidential files and destroyed a client's custody case. It means accepting that this isn't about hurt feelings. It's about professional ethics and real consequences for real people. Elias goes quiet. Then he says, maybe we all need some time to cool down. I tell him time isn't going to change the facts or fix what's been broken. I hang up. That night, I don't sleep. I lie in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. The next morning, I call a therapist named Kara, who was recommended by a colleague. I tell her I need to see someone because I'm not sleeping and having panic attacks about my career ending. She has an opening that afternoon and I take it. Her office is in a quiet building downtown. She's maybe 50, with gray hair and kind eyes. I sit on her couch and everything comes pouring out. My mother-in-law reading my files, the Facebook post, Mrs. Johnson losing custody, the bar complaint, the malpractice suit, the feeling that everything I've worked for is crumbling and there's nothing I can do to stop it. Kara listens without interrupting. When I finish, she asks me what I'm feeling right now. I tell her angry, scared, guilty, all of it at once. She asks me to separate those feelings and look at each one. The anger is at my mother-in-law for violating my trust in my office. The fear is about losing my license and my career. The guilt is about Mrs. Johnson and her kids. Kara helps me understand that I can take responsibility for my part, while still recognizing I was violated by someone I trusted. She says I made a mistake leaving my office unlocked even briefly, but my mother-in-law made a choice to snoop through confidential files. Both things can be true at the same time. Over the next few sessions, Kara keeps asking me questions that make me think deeper about what's happening. She asks what I'm most afraid of. At first I say losing my job, but she pushes me to go deeper. I realize it's not just losing my job, but losing my identity as someone who protects vulnerable people. I became a divorce attorney because I wanted to help people during the worst time of their lives. I wanted to be the person they could trust with their secrets and their fears. My mother-in-law turned me into the person who hurt my own client. She took my identity as a protector and twisted it into something harmful. That's what I can't forgive. Kara helps me see that my identity isn't destroyed, it's damaged, and there's a difference. I can rebuild trust. I can take better precautions. I can learn from this and become even more careful about protecting client information. But first I have to accept what happened and stop trying to undo it in my mind. The damage is done. Mrs. Johnson's custody hearing is coming up, and there's nothing I can do to change the outcome now. The hearing happens on a Wednesday morning. I'm not there because Wilhelmina told me my presence would only make things worse. I stay home and wait for the phone to ring. It rings at 2 in the afternoon. Wilhelmina's voice is flat when she tells me the results. Mrs. Johnson lost primary custody. She now has supervised visitation only, pending a full psychological evaluation that could take months. The judge ruled that the undisclosed mental health issues combined with the chaos of the leaked information suggested instability that needed to be addressed before she could have unsupervised time with her children. Wilhelmina says Mrs. Johnson sat in the courtroom and cried while the judge read the ruling. Her ex-husband looked smug. His lawyer looked satisfied. The whole thing was over in less than an hour. Years of Mrs. Johnson documenting her husband's affairs and hidden assets, all the work we did building her case, all of it destroyed because my mother-in-law couldn't resist gossip. I thank Wilhelmina for calling and hang up. Then I sit on my couch and stare at nothing for a long time. The next day, I get an email from Wilhelmina with an update. Mrs. Johnson's kids are moving in with their father and his pregnant mistress this weekend. The exact scenario Mrs. Johnson was trying to prevent is now happening because of my mother-in-law's Facebook post. Everything she worked to protect them from, all the evidence she gathered about her husband's deception and financial hiding, none of it mattered in the end. The judge focused entirely on her mental health and decided she was the unstable parent. Her ex gets to play the responsible father while his mistress moves into the house Mrs. Johnson used to share with him. The kids will watch their father's new baby be born, while they're only allowed to see their mother for a few supervised hours each week. Wilhelmina says Mrs. Johnson is devastated but trying to stay strong for her children. She's starting the psychological evaluation process and hoping to get her custody back eventually, but it could take a year or more. In the meantime, her kids are living with the man who cheated on her and hid money from her, the man she was trying to protect them from. All because my mother-in-law read my files and posted about it on Facebook. The letter arrived 2 days later in a thick manila envelope. I opened it at my kitchen table while my husband made coffee and the words hit me like physical blows. Mrs. Johnson's malpractice attorney laid everything out in cold legal language. They were claiming damages for her custody loss, all her legal fees from the emergency hearings, ongoing therapy costs for her and the kids, and emotional distress. The number at the bottom made my hands shake. 6 figures, maybe 7 depending on how the custody situation played out long term. My husband read over my shoulder and went quiet. We both knew what this meant. Our savings would be gone. Maybe the house too if it went to trial and the jury felt sorry for her. Which they would, because any reasonable person would. I called our insurance company first thing and spent an hour on hold before talking to someone who could actually help. They transferred me 3 times. Finally got someone who reviewed our homeowner's policy and told me what I already suspected. Professional negligence wasn't covered. The policy protected us if someone slipped on our steps or if a tree fell on a guest. It didn't protect me from failing to secure confidential client files. I'd need professional liability insurance for that, which I had through the firm, but only for work done at the office, not for files I brought home. The insurance rep suggested I contact a personal attorney. My husband found someone that afternoon through a colleague at his work. We met with her the next morning at her office downtown. She was young, maybe 5 years out of law school, but came recommended. She reviewed the malpractice letter while we sat across from her desk. Her expression stayed neutral, but I could see her taking notes in the margins. She looked up after 10 minutes and asked about our assets. We walked her through everything. The house with about 40% equity, 2 car payments, retirement accounts we couldn't touch without penalties, savings that would cover maybe 3 months of the claim. She did some quick math on her calculator and pushed it across the desk so we could see. Even in a best-case scenario where we settled early and avoided trial, we were looking at draining everything liquid and probably taking out a second mortgage. She asked about my professional liability insurance, and I explained the work-from-home situation. She made a note and said that was going to be the central issue, whether I was acting within the scope of my employment when I brought files home. If yes, the firm's insurance might cover it. If no, I was personally liable for everything. She said she'd need to review my employment contract and the firm's policies on remote work. My husband asked what our chances were of winning if it went to trial. She was honest. Not good. Mrs. Johnson had documented harm, lost custody, legal fees, emotional trauma. A jury would sympathize with a mother who lost her kids because her lawyer's family member gossiped about her private life. The fact that I didn't personally leak the information wouldn't matter much. I was responsible for keeping it secure. She recommended we try to settle as quickly as possible, minimize the damage, and move on. But settlement still meant financial devastation. Just less of it. We left her office and sat in the car for a long time. My husband finally started the engine and we drove home without talking. That afternoon, Mark called. His voice was different. Still professional, but with an edge I hadn't heard before. The firm was hiring outside counsel to investigate their potential liability, if they could be sued alongside me or if this was entirely my personal responsibility. He said it sympathetically, but I heard what he wasn't saying. The firm would protect itself first. If they could prove this was my personal failure and not a work-related incident, they'd cut me loose and let me face the lawsuit alone. I thanked him for the heads up and hung up. Then I went to my home office and stared at the space where my mother-in-law had sat reading through Mrs. Johnson's life. I called a locksmith and had him install a new deadbolt that needed a key from both sides. Ordered a security camera online that would record anyone who entered. Packed up every single physical file and drove them to the office where they should have stayed in the first place. The whole time I kept thinking about how pointless it all was. The damage was done. Installing better security now was like putting a fence around an empty field after someone stole your horse. But I did it anyway because I had to do something. My husband's phone dinged that evening. An email from his mother. Long, single-spaced, probably 2,000 words. He read it with his jaw getting tighter and tighter. Then he handed me his phone so I could see it too. She'd written this whole explanation about how she was trying to help by praying for the people in my cases. How she thought if she understood their situations better, she could pray more specifically. How she never meant for anyone to get hurt. How she was sorry. But also, how could she have known that reading the files would cause such problems? She still didn't get it. She thought the violation was sharing what she read, not reading it in the first place. Like if she'd just kept her mouth shut after snooping through confidential documents, everything would have been fine. My husband spent an hour writing his response. He copied me on it before sending. He explained attorney-client privilege in detail. Told her that confidential meant confidential, not just don't tell too many people. Walked her through how her actions destroyed Mrs. Johnson's custody case and might destroy our financial future. Listed the real-world consequences in numbered points: legal fees, malpractice claims, bar investigations, career damage. He ended by saying he loved her, but couldn't have a relationship with her until she truly understood what she'd done and stopped making excuses. I watched him hit send and then close his laptop harder than necessary. 2 days later, Rosa's report arrived by email. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the PDF with my husband standing behind me. The document was 20 pages long with attachments showing the complete chain of information transfer. Rosa had traced everything from my office to my mother-in-law's hands, to the Facebook post, to Pearl's screenshot, to Floyd's filing. Every step documented with timestamps and receipts. The executive summary made me feel sick. Rosa wrote that while my mother-in-law clearly violated my privacy and trust, I had created the conditions that made the breach possible. She noted that I left confidential files in an unlocked room during a time when I knew a house guest was present. She acknowledged that most people wouldn't expect a family member to actively snoop through work documents, but she also pointed out that basic security protocols require assuming all unauthorized persons pose a risk. Her conclusion used the word negligent 3 times. My husband read over my shoulder and squeezed my hand, but didn't argue with the findings. We both knew Rosa was right, even though it hurt to read. I forwarded the report to my attorney and copied Mark. Within an hour, Mark called to say the firm's outside counsel would want to review it as part of their liability assessment. He sounded tired, and I realized this whole mess was probably affecting his reputation too, since he supervised my work. The formal bar complaint arrived by certified mail the next morning. Donovan Steele had filed it with the State Bar's disciplinary board and included copies of Rosa's report, the Facebook screenshots, Floyd's court filings, and statements from Pearl about how she obtained the information. The charges took up 4 pages. Failure to maintain client confidentiality, negligent security of privileged information, conduct prejudicial to the administration of justice, and a new one I hadn't expected, bringing the profession into disrepute based on media coverage of the case. That last charge confused me until I Googled my name and found 3 articles about the situation. None used my name directly, but they all referenced a local divorce attorney whose family member leaked client information to opposing counsel. One article included quotes from legal ethics professors discussing the case. Another had a comment section where people debated whether working from home created unacceptable confidentiality risks. A legal blog I'd read for years ran a whole piece questioning whether attorneys could adequately secure client information in home offices, or if the pandemic's remote work trend had compromised professional standards. I closed my laptop and stared at the wall. People were using my failure as a case study. The emails from clients started that afternoon. The first one was polite and apologetic. A woman going through a contested divorce asked if it might be better for her to work with a different attorney given the current circumstances. She said she trusted me personally, but worried about how my situation might affect her case. The second email was more direct. A man in a custody dispute said he needed to protect his interests and requested immediate transfer to another lawyer at the firm. The third didn't bother with explanations, just asked for all files to be transferred and the attorney-client relationship terminated. I forwarded all 3 to Mark without comment. He called me 20 minutes later and said he'd handle the transitions personally and make sure the clients understood this was about managing their concerns, not about my competence. We both knew what he wasn't saying, that my reputation was fundamentally damaged, and more clients would probably follow. He asked if I wanted him to send a memo to current clients explaining the situation, and I said no, because that would just draw attention to something they might not have heard about yet. Better to handle requests as they came in than create panic. My husband came home from work that evening and found me sitting in the dark. He turned on the lamp and sat next to me without speaking. After a while, he said he'd taken the next week off work to help me prepare for whatever came next. He'd talked to his supervisor and explained the situation, and they'd approved the leave immediately. He said we needed to get organized, make a plan, figure out what the bar hearing would involve, and how to handle the malpractice claim. His voice was steady, but I could see the stress in his face. The lines around his eyes looked deeper, and he'd been grinding his teeth at night, something he only did when really worried. I leaned against him and said I was sorry for dragging him into this mess. He said I hadn't dragged him anywhere, that his mother had created this disaster and he was going to help me survive it. Then he asked what I needed, and I told him I just needed him to keep showing up, which he'd already been doing. We ordered takeout and spent the evening going through Rosa's report together, making notes about timeline discrepancies and possible defenses. It felt better to do something productive instead of just sitting with the dread. Wilhelmina called the next morning while I was making coffee. She said she had news that might help with the bar hearing. Mrs. Johnson had agreed to provide a statement confirming that I'd always been professional and careful with her information before this incident happened. Wilhelmina said Mrs. Johnson didn't excuse what happened and was still angry about the consequences, but she wanted the bar to know this wasn't a pattern of careless behavior. She recognized that I'd protected her confidentiality for months until my mother-in-law violated that protection. I asked why Mrs. Johnson would help me after everything that happened to her, and Wilhelmina said we should talk in person. She suggested meeting at her office in an hour. I drove downtown and met Wilhelmina in a conference room overlooking the city. She had Mrs. Johnson on speakerphone. Mrs. Johnson's voice sounded different from I remembered, harder and more tired. She said she'd spent a lot of time thinking about what happened and who was actually responsible. She said she was angry at me for leaving my office unlocked and for not having better security, but she was furious at my mother-in-law for reading private documents and sharing them publicly. She said there was a difference between my negligence and my mother-in-law's malice. She understood that I'd made a mistake by trusting someone in my own home, but my mother-in-law had actively chosen to violate her privacy multiple times, first by reading the files and then by posting about them online. Mrs. Johnson said she recognized who had actually read and shared her information, and it wasn't me. She said her statement for the bar wouldn't excuse my security failure, but it would confirm that I'd always treated her case with professionalism and care up until that point. After she hung up, Wilhelmina told me that Mrs. Johnson was trying to separate her anger at the situation from her anger at specific people. She said Mrs. Johnson blamed both of us but recognized different levels of responsibility. My husband's sister called that evening. She said their mother was devastated that we wouldn't forgive her and didn't understand why we were being so harsh. I told her that forgiveness required acknowledgement of wrongdoing, not just sadness about consequences. The sister said their mother had apologized multiple times and didn't know what else we wanted. I explained that every apology had included excuses and explanations about how she didn't mean for things to turn out badly or didn't understand the rules. I said real accountability meant accepting full responsibility without deflecting or minimizing. The sister went quiet, and then said, "Maybe I was expecting too much from an older woman who made an honest mistake." I told her there was nothing honest about sitting in my office reading through confidential files for long enough to memorize specific details. The sister said I was being cruel and hung up. Elias called 2 days later. He said he wanted to try arranging a family meeting where everyone could talk through what happened and hopefully find a path forward. My husband had been avoiding his calls, but finally answered this one. He told Elias he'd agree to meet on one condition, that his mother came prepared to take full responsibility without excuses or deflection. Elias said he'd talk to her and make sure she understood what that meant. My husband said he doubted that would happen, but he'd give it one chance. We scheduled the meeting for the following Sunday at Elias and my sister-in-law's house. My husband warned me it would probably be a disaster, but we had to try at least once. Sunday came and we drove to their house in silence. My mother-in-law's car was already in the driveway. We walked in and found everyone sitting in the living room looking uncomfortable. My mother-in-law stood up when she saw us and started talking immediately. She said she'd been thinking about everything that happened and wanted us to understand that she never meant to cause problems. She said she was just trying to understand my work better, so she could pray more specifically for the people involved. She said she didn't know reading the files would cause such serious issues and didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. My husband stood up before she finished. He said she still didn't get it, that she was still making excuses and explaining her intentions instead of taking responsibility. He said the violation wasn't sharing what she read, it was reading it in the first place. My mother-in-law started to respond, but he walked out. I followed him to the car where he sat gripping the steering wheel. We'd been there less than 10 minutes. I followed him out to the car, and we sat there for a while before he started the engine. The drive home was quiet, except for the sound of tires on pavement, and his hands gripping the steering wheel too tight. When we got inside, he went straight to the kitchen and stood there staring at nothing. I made coffee neither of us wanted, and we sat at the table until he finally spoke. He told me he was done trying to fix things with his mother. Not just for now, but until she actually changed as a person, which he didn't think would ever happen. He said he'd spent 30 years making excuses for her behavior and watching her hurt people without ever taking real responsibility. This was just the biggest example of something she'd always done. I nodded and we finished our coffee in silence. The next morning, I had my appointment with Kara. I'd been seeing her for 2 weeks and still felt like I was drowning. I sat in her office and told her about the failed family meeting and how my mother-in-law still couldn't admit what she'd done without adding excuses. Kara listened and then asked me what I was most angry about. I said everything. The files, the Facebook post, Mrs. Johnson losing her kids, my career hanging by a thread. She nodded and said I could be angry at my mother-in-law and also feel guilty about Mrs. Johnson at the same time. That holding both feelings didn't make either one less valid. She said accepting some responsibility for leaving files accessible didn't mean accepting all the blame for what happened. My mother-in-law made a choice to read those files and another choice to post about them online. Those were her actions, not mine. I left feeling slightly less like I was crushed. 2 days later, I got an email from the Bar Association. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. 6 weeks to prepare a defense for something that felt indefensible. I met with my attorney that afternoon and we started building our argument. We were going with the angle that I'd taken reasonable precautions and that the breach resulted from an extraordinary violation of trust by a family member. My office was locked, the files were secure. I had no reason to believe someone I trusted in my home would actively snoop through confidential documents. My attorney said it was our best shot, but warned me the bar might not see it that way. They might argue I should have anticipated all household members as potential risks. 3 weeks before the hearing, Donovan's pre-hearing brief arrived. I read it twice and felt sicker each time. He argued that reasonable precautions must account for all household members, and that leaving confidential files in an unlocked room, even briefly, constitutes negligence. He pointed out that attorney-client privilege is absolute, and that any breach, regardless of how it occurs, demonstrates insufficient security measures. His argument was legally sound even if it felt harsh. He was doing his job, building a case based on facts and precedent. The fact that those facts might destroy my career was irrelevant to his legal reasoning. I started gathering character references the next day. I reached out to former clients, colleagues, judges I'd appeared before. Everyone responded quickly with letters emphasizing my professionalism and ethical standards. One judge wrote 3 paragraphs about my dedication to protecting client confidentiality in court proceedings. A colleague detailed how I'd once refused to discuss a case with her, even though we worked at the same firm because she wasn't directly involved. Former clients described how safe they'd felt sharing sensitive information with me. I collected 15 letters total, each one a testament to years of careful, ethical practice. But I knew the bar panel would focus on this one catastrophic failure, not the hundreds of cases I'd handled properly before it. Mrs. Johnson's malpractice attorney called me directly 4 weeks before the hearing. Her voice was professional but cold as she laid out their demands. They wanted compensation covering Mrs. Johnson's legal fees from the custody battle, her therapy costs, and a substantial amount for loss of custody time with her children. She quoted a number that made my stomach drop. I told her I'd need to discuss it with my attorney, and she said they'd wait 1 week for a response before filing the formal lawsuit. My attorney spent 3 days negotiating with them. Every time he called with an update, the number got slightly smaller but stayed devastating. We finally reached a settlement that would wipe out most of my savings, but wouldn't force us to sell our house. I agreed to it because Mrs. Johnson deserved compensation, and fighting would only create more damage. My attorney warned me that settling might look like an admission of guilt to the bar panel, but I didn't care anymore. Mrs. Johnson had lost time with her kids because of what happened in my house. She deserved something, even if it bankrupted me. The settlement paperwork arrived 2 days later. I read through the clauses with my attorney on speakerphone. The worst part was the acknowledgement section where I had to state that my security measures were insufficient and that Mrs. Johnson suffered real harm as a result. Signing it felt like carving out a piece of my professional identity with a dull knife. I was admitting in writing that I'd failed to protect my client, that my precautions weren't enough, that I was responsible for her suffering. My hand shook as I signed each page. My attorney witnessed it remotely and told me I was doing the right thing. I hung up and sat staring at the signed documents for an hour. 2 weeks before the bar hearing, a letter arrived addressed to me in handwriting I recognized. My mother-in-law had sent it directly instead of through my husband. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. She wrote that she'd been thinking about everything that happened and wanted me to know she was sorry. She said she was wrong to read my files and wrong to post about them on Facebook. She understood now that she'd caused serious harm to real people, and she took full responsibility for her actions. She hoped I could forgive her someday, but understood if I couldn't. The letter was 2 pages of what looked like genuine remorse without excuses or explanations. I showed it to my husband that evening and he read it twice before handing it back. He said it sounded like his sister wrote it, which told me everything about its sincerity. The timing was too convenient, coming right before my hearing when an apology from her might help my case. The language was too careful, too legally precise. My mother-in-law didn't talk like that. She talked in justifications and deflections and reasons why things weren't really her fault. This letter was written by someone coaching her on what to say to minimize her own liability. I filed it away, knowing I'd probably have to show it to my attorney, but feeling nothing about the words on the page. The bar hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in downtown. I wore my most conservative suit and arrived 30 minutes early. The conference room was smaller than I expected, with a long table where 3 panel members sat reviewing documents, 2 women and 1 man. all attorneys with decades of experience. They looked up when I entered and gestured to the chair facing them. My attorney sat beside me and opened his briefcase. The lead panel member introduced herself and explained the process. I would testify first, then they'd hear from the investigator, then witnesses, then arguments from both sides. She asked if I understood, and I nodded. My throat felt tight. She asked me to describe what happened on the day my mother-in-law accessed the files. I walked through every detail. The shower, the locked office, coming downstairs to find her at lunch knowing things she shouldn't know. The panel members took notes. One asked why I kept files at home instead of only at the office. I explained I'd worked from home 2 days a week for 3 years without incident, that I had a dedicated office with a lock, that I followed all firm protocols for document security. Another panel member asked if anyone else had keys to my office. Just me and my husband, and he'd never gone in there without permission. The third panel member leaned forward and asked the question I'd been dreading. Had I considered that family members visiting my home posed a security risk to confidential information? I admitted I hadn't. My mother-in-law had visited before and never gone into my office. I'd trusted that a locked door and basic respect for boundaries would be enough. The panel member wrote something down that made my stomach hurt. Judah walked in carrying a thick folder and took the witness chair. He was professional and thorough as he presented his findings. He'd interviewed me, my husband, my mother-in-law, several people from her church, and the paralegal who screenshot the Facebook post. He'd traced exactly how information traveled from my files to the courtroom. His conclusion was careful but clear. I hadn't intentionally violated confidentiality, but I'd failed to adequately secure client information against reasonably foreseeable risks. He said family members accessing a home office wasn't unforeseeable, especially during visits. He said leaving confidential files in an unlocked room, even briefly, created unnecessary risk. He said my security measures were adequate for routine circumstances, but not sufficient for the heightened risk of having house guests. The panel members asked him several questions about whether I'd violated any specific bar rules. He said yes, the rules requiring attorneys to make reasonable efforts to prevent unauthorized access to confidential information. One panel member asked if he thought I was negligent or just unlucky. He paused before answering. Both, he said. Unlucky that my mother-in-law chose to snoop, but negligent in not anticipating that possibility and taking additional precautions. The words hit like a physical blow, even though I'd known they were coming. The screen at the end of the table flickered on, and Mrs. Johnson appeared via video conference. She looked tired and older than I remembered. The panel chair asked her to describe how the breach had affected her and her children. Mrs. Johnson spoke quietly but clearly. She said I'd been a good attorney who listened to her and fought hard for her interests. She said she'd trusted me completely with the most painful details of her marriage and her struggles. She said learning that a stranger had read about her therapy and her private fears felt like being violated all over again. She described the custody hearing where her ex-husband's lawyer used her own words against her. The panic attacks she'd disclosed to me in confidence, the medication she took for anxiety, the postpartum depression she'd worked through years ago. All of it presented as evidence she was unstable and unfit. She said her children now lived primarily with their father and his pregnant girlfriend. She saw them every other weekend instead of having them with her most of the time like before. Her voice broke when she talked about her daughter asking why mommy couldn't come to the school events anymore. 2 of the panel members looked visibly affected. One woman's expression hardened with what looked like anger, though I couldn't tell if it was directed at me or the situation. Mrs. Johnson finished by saying she didn't think I was a bad person, but that what happened had destroyed her family. The screen went dark and the room stayed silent for a long moment. Donovan took his turn and argued that the bar should suspend my license for at least 1 year. He stood at the end of the table and spoke directly to the panel. Confidentiality is the foundation of the attorney-client relationship, he said. Without it, clients can't trust their lawyers, and the entire legal system breaks down. He said my failure to secure client information had resulted in exactly the kind of harm the confidentiality rules are designed to prevent. A vulnerable person going through a divorce had her private struggles used as weapons against her. Her children had been removed from her primary care because I didn't take adequate precautions. He said intent doesn't matter when the consequences are this severe. He said every attorney has a duty to anticipate risks and protect against them, and I'd failed that duty. He said a strong suspension would send a message that confidentiality breaches have serious consequences, regardless of how they occur. He sat down and the panel members reviewed their notes. My attorney stood and made his argument for a public reprimand and probation instead of suspension. He pointed to my clean record over 8 years of practice. He emphasized the extraordinary circumstances of a family member's deliberate betrayal of trust. He said I'd taken reasonable security measures that had worked successfully for years. He said suspending me would punish Mrs. Johnson further by preventing her from receiving the settlement money I'd agreed to pay. He said I'd already taken additional steps to prevent future incidents, including never working from home again and installing enhanced security measures. He said probation with mandatory ethics training would serve the bar's interests without destroying my career entirely. He argued that the real wrongdoer was my mother-in-law, who'd committed what amounted to theft of confidential information, and that I shouldn't bear the full weight of her actions. The panel members asked him questions about what supervision would look like during probation, and how the bar could ensure I wouldn't have similar lapses in judgment. He answered each one carefully. The panel chair announced they would deliberate and asked us to wait outside. My husband was sitting in the hallway and stood up when he saw my face. We found chairs at the far end of the corridor away from everyone else. He took my hand and held it between both of his. Neither of us spoke for a while. Other people walked past, attorneys and staff going about their normal business while my entire career hung in the balance. My husband squeezed my hand and said that whatever happened, we'd get through it together. I nodded but couldn't form words. 2 hours felt like 2 days. Every time someone opened the conference room door, my heart jumped. Finally, the panel chair appeared and asked us to come back in. The panel members had arranged themselves behind the table again with papers in front of them. The chair read from a prepared statement. They'd found that I had violated the rules regarding client confidentiality through negligent security practices. However, they'd also found that I had no intent to harm my client and had cooperated fully with the investigation. They'd considered my clean record, the extraordinary circumstances, and the steps I'd taken to prevent future incidents. Their decision was a 6-month suspension followed by 2 years of probation with mandatory ethics training. During probation, I'd need to submit quarterly reports on my security practices and complete advanced courses on confidentiality protection. The suspension would begin immediately. I could apply for reinstatement after 6 months by demonstrating I'd completed initial ethics requirements and showing I had adequate security measures in place. It was more than I'd hoped for, but less than I'd feared. I thanked them and left the room before my emotions could spill over. Mark called me that evening after I'd had time to process. He said the firm would welcome me back after my suspension ended. He'd already talked to the other partners about how to reintegrate me gradually. During probation, I'd work on internal matters and non-client-facing projects to rebuild trust slowly. Research, document review, training materials, things that didn't involve direct client contact. After probation ended, we'd reassess based on how things went. He said he believed I could recover from this professionally if I did the work. His tone was kind but realistic. This would follow me forever, but it didn't have to define me forever. I thanked him and meant it. Having a path forward, even a difficult one, felt better than the void I'd been staring into. I started my suspension the next week and threw myself into the required ethics courses. Advanced confidentiality training, security protocols, risk assessment procedures. I took notes like a first-year law student and completed every assignment thoroughly. I also started volunteering with legal aid on non-confidential matters, helping with intake forms and basic paperwork that didn't involve accessing client files. It felt good to do legal work again, even small tasks. I kept seeing Kara weekly to process everything that had happened. She helped me work through the guilt about Mrs. Yu Johnson, and the anger at my mother-in-law, and the grief over my damaged career. Slowly, I started to feel less like I was drowning and more like I was swimming toward shore. 4 months into my suspension, Wilhelmina called with unexpected news. Johnson had reached a new custody arrangement through mediation. Instead of supervised visits every other weekend, she'd have alternating weeks with her children. It wasn't what she'd wanted originally, full primary custody, but it was a meaningful improvement from where things stood after the hearing. Wilhelmina said Mrs. Johnson's ex-husband had agreed to the change after she completed her psychological evaluation, which showed she was stable and capable. The evaluator had noted that her anxiety was situational and related to the divorce, not a chronic condition that affected her parenting. Mrs. Johnson's kids would spend half their time with her again. Wilhelmina said Mrs. Johnson wanted me to know because she thought I'd want to hear that things had gotten somewhat better. I thanked her and sat with that information for a long time after we hung up. I sat down with my husband one evening and we drafted actual rules about his mother. No visits to our house, period. If we saw her at all, it would be at his sister's place or a restaurant with other family there. He wrote it out in an email to his whole family so nobody could pretend they misunderstood. His sister called within an hour, saying we were being cruel and his mother was devastated. My husband stayed calm and told her the boundaries weren't negotiable. She tried again 2 weeks later with the same argument. He gave her the same answer. His mother sent cards with long handwritten notes about how much she missed us and didn't understand why we were punishing her. He threw them away without reading past the first few lines. At Thanksgiving, we drove to his sister's house and his mother was there like we'd agreed. She tried to hug me and I stepped back. We stayed for 2 hours, ate dinner, made polite conversation, and left. She complained to his sister that we were cold and distant. He told his sister that was exactly how things would stay. 6 months passed and I went back to the firm. Mark gave me a small office near the library and assigned me to review discovery documents for other attorneys' cases. No client meetings, no court appearances, just reading through files and flagging relevant information. It felt strange being back, but not really back. I worked carefully and double-checked everything because I knew people were watching to see if I'd learned anything. Mrs. Johnson emailed me 3 months after I returned. She said her kids were doing better with the new custody schedule, and she wanted me to know she didn't blame me anymore. I wrote back thanking her and saying I was glad things improved. We've exchanged maybe 5 emails since then, always brief and polite. My husband and I are closer now than before all this happened. Going through something this bad together either breaks you apart or makes you stronger, and somehow we ended up stronger. My career will never be what it was before. Other attorneys are professional with me, but there's always this slight distance, this awareness that I'm the person who had the confidentiality breach. I've accepted that. I'm building something different now, something smaller and more careful. I installed a safe in my home office and I lock it every single time I step away. I never take calls about cases when anyone else is home. These things feel excessive, but they're necessary because I learned the hard way that trust isn't enough, and neither is being careful most of the time.